Ready?
Yep, let's go.
Using the microphone. Oh, we are. Hello, we're live.
Hey peeps, welcome to our live streaming. We're going to talk about skin contact wines tonight. And we've just fortified ourselves with a bit of gin.
We have. I'm still finishing mine.
And we're going to open up a skin contact Pinot Gris tonight as well.
We are indeed. So we just thought we'd mix it up a little bit. The last three virtual tastings were a bit of a marathon. So this one's meant to be kind of a quick, easy, slightly more informal version. So to begin with, I guess skin contact is a really big part of what we do here. It's probably, I guess, two of our flagship wines are skin contact wines.
Yeah, the skin contact wines are our gateway drug, I suppose. We make some pretty interesting wines with that, and we're pretty successful commercially with these wines as well.
Part of the story, or I guess what the story has evolved into, is this exploration of some of the earliest, most traditional and most rustic wines in the world. So kind of via the avenue of skin contact, we've come to kind of discover and find a whole new appreciation for the wines of Georgia, as in Georgia next to Russia, not Georgia in the US. So that's kind of where we're going to start off this evening. You ready for a video?
Let's go for it. Hey peeps, I'm inside a quevery, and this is the type of vessel that we use to make our skin contact wines.
So you can see here what most of one looks like from the outside, and they're quite large. It's about as tall as I am, and they hold about 500 to 700 litres each. And the way we have them installed here in the ground is very traditional. It's the way they would have been, pre-stainless steel tanks and pre-oak barrels. And it's just a really nice, authentic, rustic and traditional way to make these skin contact wines. It's very much in the vein of how skin contact wines have been made for literally thousands of years.
Ta-da! There you go. So they're our queveries, and we imported them directly from Georgia, the Soviet Republic of Georgia, the ex-Soviet Republic of Georgia.
Yes, be very careful with that one.
Exactly. And so we make quite a few wines from these vessels. We make white wines and red wines, and we try and emulate the type of wines that are made in Georgia.
Which segues very neatly into our first question for the evening. We have David with a question about exactly what we're just talking about.
An awesome question.
Hi guys, it's David here, another lover of your fabulous wines. Just wanted to ask a question for your skin contact Q&A. Having been in Georgia and tasted a lot of their wines over there, anything from all their orange wines, amber wines, and their beautiful separavis, the way they're made in the quevery over there. I'm just wondering if you guys are doing anything similar or different to the Georgian style, and just the way you're getting those beautiful flavours through onto your wines. Anyway, look forward to your answers as well as tasting more of your wine. Thanks again. See ya. Bye.
David, excellent question. And I think the thing that we do differently is that we always have science in the back of our mind. We try and emulate the techniques that the Georgians do, basically try and foster the wines, foster the grapes, look after the grapes, let the grapes make the wine themselves. But we've got microbiology in our background. We know all about the microbiology, and we're hoping to make a wine that's going to be microbiologically stable.
Having spent some time in Georgia, I'm sure that you are understanding what I'm saying when I say that Georgian wines can range from fascinating and interesting to challenging sometimes. And I think, as with many European styles of wine, they are a little bit shackled by tradition, whereas we have a unique opportunity over here to, I suppose, stand on the shoulders of giants. So yeah, we tried to be as true as possible to the incredible 8,000 years worth of history that the Georgians have, but also, reinterpreting that with a little bit of a modern view of what's going on in those big terracotta pots.
And that modern view as well, I think, talks about producing a product that's going to be delicious, that people are going to enjoy. We're lucky enough, or we're sensible enough maybe, to be able to use things like sulfur dioxide and also use techniques that we safeguard the wines from oxygen. We're trying to keep the wines as reductive as possible. And so consequently, we're trying to stabilize the microbiological activity in these vessels.
And, you consider that the Georgians have been making wine like this for 8,000 years. It was only in fairly relatively recent history that Louis Pasteur was actually able to A, work out, and B, prove that yeast and fermentation is a microbiological process. So pre-Pasteur, they actually had no idea what was going on. It was all, hundreds and thousands of years of trial and error, which we have the advantage of learning from. So to kind of put this in context, the Georgian wine style is that they make both their reds and whites with extended skin contact. Red wines traditionally ferment on skins for maybe 7 to 10 days and usually pressed around the end of ferment. White wines are usually pressed before fermentation even begins. So, when we're making conventional white wines, we press the grapes first and only ferment the juice. Whereas the Georgians have always fermented the whole whites. And in fact, in Georgia, the whites typically spend more time on skins than the reds do. And that's maybe one thing where we are doing it a little different, in that our reds get a really, 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 really long time on skins. And we'll talk about another international style that has that history later on. But first, we have a question about what skin contact does to a wine.
Ooh, okay, let's go for it.
So let's hear from Chip.
Hi guys, my name's Chip. Absolutely love your wine. I just had a quick question about the beautiful orange wine. Just wondering why the color is so different from normal skin contact wines, why it's that beautiful orange color. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Chip. That was a very good question. We're about to imbibe in this wine, and I hopefully you can see the label. It's the Haro Pinot Gris, and this is made by our international intern, Haruki-san, and this is Pinot Gris.
Made on skins in terracotta, so the same kind of thing we're talking about. So the wine that Chip was referring to was our Gentil, which is a mixture of Gewürztraminer Muscat and Pinot Gris. And both Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris have a slightly pinkish hue to their skins. They're not quite white grapes, but they're not quite red grapes, hence the gris in Pinot Gris as opposed to Pinot Noir or Pinot Blanc. So this wine that Glen is drinking, and I'm about to drink, is completely Pinot Gris. So that you can see it has that beautiful pinkish hue to it, which comes from, I can't remember how many days on skins, but probably about 2 to 3 months on skins for this wine. And that's all the color we managed to get out of it.
So it's 63 days on skins.
Which is more than you'd get out of a typical white wine, but as you can see, much less than you'd get out of a red wine.
So when you actually are walking through a vineyard of Pinot Gris, you'll actually see these grapes, and these grapes are sort of like got that greyish, purplish hue to them. Their Pinot Gris is a very interesting colour, and when fermented on skins, you end up getting this pinkish, sort of really beautiful looking colour.
Very pretty wine. Unfortunately, this wine's not commercially available anymore. It was a little project wine that Haruki did, and he managed to sell some to some niche Japanese restaurants around the place, but sorry, can't have any.
Soz. A lot went to Japan as well. It went back to Japan. So there you go.
True. So from very lightly coloured pinkish grapes, we're going to go to some very, very, very full-bodied red wine with our next question from Sean.
Hey guys, Sean from Sydney here. Just wondering what you can tell me about skin contact in Amarone and Ripasso wine production. Thanks.
This was a really awesome question because we
Kind of
never
came out of left field for me. I never even consider this in the context of skin contact.
Yeah,
but-
because the thing is, we always think of skin contact in relation to our Quevries and how we make our red wines in the Quevries. You know, when we make red wines in Quevries, we have our skin contact of sometimes about 6 months. So this question was really, really cool. So
I guess a little bit of background on what these wines are. So Amarone and Valpolicella Ripasso and also Valpolicella are three wines that come from the northeast of Italy. They are the wines of Verona, and if anyone's a Shakespeare fan, it's where we set our scene in Romeo and Juliet.
And the thing is as well, you know, when you talk about Italian wines, you talk about the region of where they're coming from. So this region is known as Valpolicella.
Absolutely.
So there are three grape varieties that make up Valpolicella,
Yes.
which is Corvina,
Rondinella,
and there's one more.
Molinara.
Okay, cool. So these are three different grape varieties which make Valpolicella.
And in fact, locally they call Corvina Veronese, as in the grape from Verona.
So basically, Valpolicella, the basic Valpolicella, is quite light and acidic and very, very easy to drink.
Yeah, it's not a terribly tannic variety, but it does like to get ripe. So you kind of get these, for somewhere so far north in Europe, you get these fairly kind of ripe, fruity, juicy styles of wine. I guess maybe even comparable to Barbera or something like that.
Yeah. So that's the first one. Valpolicella is this light, fun, easy drinking red wine. And then you've got Amarone.
Yeah, so Amarone is actually not that traditional. It's not as old as the other wines of the region, and it was discovered very much by accident. They make a traditional wine in the region called recotto, and they make recotto by leaving the grapes on the vine in a year where they don't have too much rain and too much disease pressure till they get really, really ripe. And then they harvest them and they actually lay them out on racks in the sun to dry them until they end up being about 30% of their original weight. So at this point, they're almost raisins, and they are so dense and syrupy and sugary, and they make this beautiful, luscious, sweet, rich wine.
Yeah.
And the story goes that, sorry.
That's how it sort of concentrates all the flavors and the characters.
Absolutely. The story goes that some barrels of this recotto were left at the back of a winery, you know, down in the caves in the cellar, and totally forgotten about. And they continued to ferment until they were almost dry. So these wines ended up being 16% alcohol and just huge, monstrous wines. And that's what Amarone actually means. It means the great bitter one. But in this sense, bitter is basically a synonym for dry. So what they mean is, you know, this is a really alcoholic wine.
And that tradition as well only started, I think, like at the turn of the last century. It's really quite a recent phenomenon.
Yeah,
so
it's
you've
not
got
as traditional as they would lead you to believe.
so therefore you've got the two wines. You've got the light and friendly and easy drinking Valpolicella. Then you've got this heavy alcoholic concentrated Amarone.
Yes.
Then
Hang on, but what's Amarone got to do with skin contact? So because this wine has so much sugar and it has, so much sugar turns into so much alcohol, the yeast really, really, really struggle to ferment this wine. So quite often, and they're picking it really late and really ripe, so it's pretty cold by the time they harvest it, which means it's cold in the winery and in the cellars as well. So this wine can spend, 9 to 12 months just finishing ferment. Like it ferments super, super, super slowly. And they leave it on skins the entire time. So this is probably the world-class example of a super extended skin contact red wine. And in fact, this is where the ripasso method comes in, because this wine spends so long fermenting that they actually press it off during the next vintage. Then they have a very Italian thing that they do with the leftovers.
So what they do with the leftovers is they press the Amarone. They've got the pumice, and the pumice is all the dried pressed skins and the pips. And what they do is they get the Valpolicella and they, I suppose, steep it with this dried pumice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes they re-ferment it, sometimes they just macerate it after the fermentation.
And so what happens is that it supercharges what was going to be a light Valpolicella. They supercharge this Valpolicella to this other wine. So you make 3 different wines or 3 different styles of wine from Valpolicella.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I suppose that is the story there. And that's what ripasso means. It means repassing the new wine over last year's super dense, intense, high alcohol skins. Not wanting to waste a single drop of that precious alcohol that the Italians have produced.
Sean, that was an excellent question. But I'd like to do a plug for us. We've actually made an Amarone style of wine.
We have.
But instead of being made with the traditional varieties, we've made a Amarone style wine with Shiraz. So that Amarone wine, that Amarone style of wine, comes with our trilogy of Shiraz.
It does, and we will actually be doing a virtual tasting on the Shiraz trilogy in 6 weeks' time. So
Thanks, Jack.
I feel like I want to say it's about the 27th of August, but it will be Thursday in 6 weeks' time. We have 2 other things scheduled between now and then. So, yeah, next question.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So now we are going to hear from Amy.
Hey, Glen and Andrew. Thanks so much for doing this Q&A tonight. I'm shamelessly showing off my daughter, but one of the questions I just wanted to ask is, what are you guys finding in relation to the judges who rate the wines like James Halliday? Are they really embracing the orange and skin contact wines, or are they still a little bit old school? And do you think it's kind of motivated by, I guess, the hipsters and millennials, or do you think it's here to stay? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Say bye.
Excellent question, Amy. When it comes to judges, I think the judges that really sort of champion this style of wine are people like Max Allen, Mike Benny. They're the 2 sort of Australian wine judges that really love these wines. And as well, Tony Harper in Brisbane.
Yeah, it's a slightly tricky thing with these. I mean, there are progressive wine shows and there are traditional wine shows. And Glenn and I have both done some show judging, and it's an ordeal, to be honest. But you do get to see a lot of interesting things, and you get an insight into how these things work. And unfortunately, the Australian system and the 20-point system doesn't necessarily have a lot of room in it for wines that don't fit a particular technical mold. And that seems to be the issue we have. Whereas some wine shows do embrace these styles of wine. And in fact, the RASQ wine show, which happens out of Toowoomba, has an experimental class specifically for these styles of wine. So I think the times they are changing.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's really interesting to see that our wines are not only popular in a lot of interesting places here in Australia, but we're exporting our wines to Japan. The Japanese love these sort of styles of wine. And we're just about to crack the American market, which is fantastic. So fingers crossed, we're about to crack it. It's interesting to see that there are a lot of books about these styles of wine: amber wines, orange wines, skin contact wines. It's all the same sort of styles of wine. And I think you're right, the hipsters are really into it. They're driving the interest of, they're behind these wines. They love these wines. And I think there is a movement that I think is gaining momentum.
The thing is, what we're talking about here is it's not really hipster and it's not really trendy. And I definitely don't think it's being driven by millennials. I think millennials are embracing it. But what we're talking about here is some of the oldest, most rustic styles of winemaking in the world. So we're not really doing new things. We're actually pioneering old techniques, if you like. But as we talked about in the beginning, just doing it with a new philosophy and a new perspective on how to do these wines. But they're valid styles, and I think they have incredible places next to food and as alternatives to what we've come to understand as conventional wine.
I think, what is old is new again. And I think particularly in Australia, where we adopt a lot of interesting new ideas, particularly Aussies, particularly New World people, the Americans, the Kiwis, the Canadians, the South Africans, New World people are looking for something different, something out of the ordinary, something out of the box sort of thing.
They want a story.
They want a
something
story.
they can engage with.
Yeah, and that old adage, I don't want to drink what my parents used to drink.
Yeah, not my father's beer.
Yeah. So they're looking for something new, something interesting, something with a story. And I think that story is here to stay.
So, speaking of food and wine, our final video question for the evening. And guys out there on the chat, we are keeping an eye on it. So if any of you have any questions you'd like us to answer, please shoot them through now. If anything's come up that you don't understand, or if you've suddenly had a brainwave, hopefully not a stroke, be sure to ask it. We have Jack keeping an eye, and he'll let us know if any good questions came through. But before that, we are going to hear from Chef Dylan.
Chef Dylan, come on.
A question about food.
Hello, Glen and Andrew. So my question is, I am going to be making a creamy bacon carbonara, and I was wondering what type of wine would go best with that, a skin contact or non-skin contact white wine? I'd love to hear your answer, guys.
Creamy carbonara, that is a controversial thing.
Dylan, you should know better.
So,
unless he means a creamy texture from all the egg yolks.
Exactly. So, to remind everyone, carbonara is not about the cream, it's all about the eggs.
Yes.
So the traditional ingredients of carbonara is obviously pasta, eggs, raw eggs.
Egg yolks, pancetta, cracked black pepper, salt. That's really about it.
Yeah, maybe some garlic if you want to sort of like spice it up a bit.
I don't know. You're kind of pushing my purist boundaries a little bit.
Anyway, skin contact wines have a lot of, I suppose, phenolics.
Yes.
Not only, as you can see, do skin contact wines have a little bit of colour, but they have a lot of texture that has been extracted from fermenting on skins. So you've got a lot of that sort of like red wine characteristics coming through in these white wines. And so that texture of the furriness on the roof of your mouth, the top of your tongue.
So, yes, I guess whether your carbonara has cream in it or whether you know how to make carbonara and it doesn't have cream in it, it is still a very rich dish. So what we're talking about here is an interplay between fats and tannins. And this is where we really get into the science of food and wine matching. And a lot of people have intuitive approaches, or they look at, does this flavor match that flavor? But when you get down to it, there's a much deeper level and there's a much more real level to matching food and wines. And that's often thinking about how the chemicals and the molecules in these things actually interact as you're experiencing it.
So these groups of compounds that are extracted from extended skin contact or fermenting on skins are, I suppose, phenolics. And phenolics not only have a range of compounds that are colour compounds, but they're also textural compounds as well. And those textural compounds, they have an affinity for fats and for proteins, and they love to have a party in your mouth.
So when we're talking about phenolics, often these phenolic compounds are what we call long chain compounds or polymers. So if you imagine, they come in little parts like Lego blocks, and they actually join together and they get longer and longer. And that's one of the things people talk about when they refer to, aging, particularly of red wines, is allowing time for these phenolics to get longer and longer. And they're not only long molecules, but they're also jagged molecules. So almost imagine like a line fishing thing where you have a fishing line coming down with all these little hooks hanging off it. That's kind of the structural key to how these phenolics interact with your mouth and with the foods you're eating. And Glenn has a fantastic way of describing this, so I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, so, phenolics, when you take a sip of your wine, you coat your mouth with all these lovely sort of like furry, textural qualities of the wine. And they sit, these chemicals sit on the roof of your mouth, the top of your tongue, and they're sitting there waiting for a bite of food. And the phenolics have an affinity to fats and to protein. And they're sitting there wavering away, and out you take a bite of your food. In comes the protein and the fat, and the phenolics will go, "Ooh, I'll have a bit of that protein. I'll have a bit of that fat. I'll have a bit of this. I'll have a bit of that." And what happens is, what is originally a molecule that's about this big ends up getting bigger, and bigger and bigger. And so consequently, these molecules that are attached to your mouth start to change, and they start to have a party in your mouth. And so this is the science behind food and wine matching. And so, when someone says, love a nice red wine with my steak, we intuitively say that, but that has all to do with food and wine matching, and it has all to do with phenolics, tannins, having an affinity to fats and to proteins. And this is what happens with skin contact wines. Because they have these phenolics, they have these textural qualities, they go so well with fatty, with high proteinaceous foods.
So, I mean, if we're talking egg yolks and pancetta, plenty of protein, plenty of fat, perfect match with skin contact white wines. And if you're not drinking skin contact, then you at least need something with heaps of acid in it to cut through that richness and creaminess.
Absolutely. So if not a skin contact wine, I would say, you know, a really racy and austere Semillon, Riesling maybe, or Champagne.
Champagne wouldn't be a bad choice. I mean, also I'd be looking to where this dish comes from in Italy, and some of the Italian whites have that beautiful kind of textural but unfruity neutrality. There's this kind of blanched almond, round, easygoingness about them. So I would be going something
like Fiano?
Maybe not Fiano, but, you know, an Orvieto or a Garganiga.
Garganiga, it's such an unsexy word.
It is, but it's really good wine.
Meh.
A bit of Suave.
Oh, Suave
is where Garganiga comes from, so it's what
Garganiga
the Italians call
doesn't
it.
sound nice.
Yeah, Suave. Bit of Suave.
All right. There was a question, Jack.
We've got it here. So David was asking whether we are considering a fizz in the range. So we have toyed with the idea of Pet Nat. Pet Nat's kind of popular and we could do it. But when it comes to traditional sparkling, one of the things that the Champenois and all of the kind of great world producers of sparkling wine don't really want to tell you is that sparkling wine is super industrial winemaking. You really need to have a lot of very specific, very specialized, very expensive equipment, which is why actually the vast majority of even Australian producers will make the base wine and they'll actually send that off to someone who has all this equipment and have it turned into sparkling wine and then get it back again. Not a huge amount of places actually make their own sparkling on site. I realize some do, but the vast majority do not.
To make good fizz, to make good sparkling, you really need top quality equipment, and it's very expensive.
And I suppose the other side of it, which is completely Epicurean, is that we adore champagne, and it's really nice to have one style of wine that is not work related when we enjoy it.
Absolutely. And look, you know, when Andrew says that we adore champagne, that's a little bit of an understatement. We shamelessly have a bottle of champagne in our fridge all the time.
I think we've got 2 in there at the moment.
Shh, don't say that. And from a wine making perspective, you know, when it comes to learning about winemaking and becoming qualified as a winemaker and understanding how difficult it is to make wine, but then again, how difficult it is to make really good sparkling wine, i.e. champagne. It is really the holy grail of winemaking, and not vintage champagne, but non-vintage champagne. Non-vintage champagne is the holy grail. When it comes to non-vintage champagne, you know, it's all about house style. It's all about making a consistent product. That Moët & Chandon in 1978 should be absolutely the same as non-vintage Moët & Chandon in 2020. Mm-hmm. And that is a skill that is, I think, beyond my capability.
I think it's a skill that is learnt over centuries and passed down from generation to generation. I mean, we had the great privilege of doing a tour at Billy-Cast-Samont in Champagne the last time we were there. And, you know, they tell the story of how, you know, it's the father and the 2 brothers and the chef de cave, you know, the cellar master. And, you know, it's a group of about 5 or 6 people who are the living taste memory of what their house style should taste like. You know, this is a group of people who do not travel on the same plane. They do not travel in the same limousine together. They, if they all get wiped out, that's the end of the house. The house has to reinvent itself. So it's quite an incredible thing, and it's something that we do not aspire to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Andrew is right. It's like champagne for us or sparkling wine, which is really champagne for us, is our wine that is our pleasure, that we don't aspire to make it, and we relish in drinking it.
Absolutely. So I just noticed a question from Dan saying, "Ooh, what is your favorite champagne?"
Ooh, okay. So Dan, I hope London's having nice weather. I don't know, it's bloody freezing cold here, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
My favourite champagne is non-vintage Krug. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, given that Glenn has just told you how much respect we have for the winemaking that is involved in producing a non-vintage champagne to a house style, then Krug non-vintage is, I suppose, one of the most exemplary examples of that. And it's just an absolute pleasure to drink on any occasion. But like so many other wines, it's horses for courses. They're a great aperitif champagnes to drink before dinner. They're a fantastic, lighter styles to drink with entree, and there are some nice meaty rosés that you can drink right through the steak course.
All saying that, Dan, when you come back from London, if you're bringing back some English sparkling wine, we would be more than happy to give it a go.
I've tried a couple. Yeah, they're not champagne yet, but they don't have the hundreds of years of history, so maybe we'll get that.
Yeah, but it still has all that sort of interesting chalky terroir, and there's some great potential there for UK sparkling wine.
Just about time to wrap up, but I've just seen one more question from David. He says, "Your Saperavi is wonderful. Is it a varietal you are wanting to make a standout as you have begun?"
Absolutely. Saperavi for us, I think, will end up being a flagship wine for us. It's interesting, we've only made it 3 times, so it's fascinating for us. We don't quite understand how it reacts. It reacts, well, for the 3 times that we've made it, it's reacted differently each time. We're not quite sure about the varietal characters of Saperavi. What we do know is that there is this innate rustic quality to it, which is absolutely fascinating. And that could be due to its ancient origins, I think.
Well, I mean, when you think about history, long kind of history, the Caucasus, which is where Georgia is, and Saperavi is the noble variety of Georgia in the reds. So, the Caucasus are the birthplace of the grapevine. It's where in the world the grapevine that we make wine from is native to. So, this is, one of the progenitors of many, many different kinds of grapes that are spread all throughout Europe now.
It's interesting to see that, out of the 1,300 different grape varieties that we make wine out of, something like 520 of the grape varieties are indigenous of the Caucasus Mountains. And so the Caucasus Mountains is, the physical border between Georgia and Russia. So it's interesting that, those varieties come from the birthplace of winemaking.
But yes, we have the Georgian Kfevries out there in the garden. We have the Georgian grape. It's all part, I guess it's the ultimate expression of the project we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's a story, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. Quick question about the difference between new Barolo and old Barolo. I don't think that's so much about skin contact. I think oak is really the big argument there. So maybe that's a conversation for another Q&A.
And I think it's all about terroir as well. So that's a great segue to our next Q&A, and our next Q&A is all about...
Of course it is. I didn't even think.
Ta-da! Is all about Nebbiolo.
Yes. So we are doing another virtual tasting, so the longer format 3-wine version, like we've done for the previous 3 sessions before this one, in 2 weeks' time, which is the 30th of July. And we will be looking at 3 Nebbiolos that we have produced from 2012, 2014, and last year's slightly different style.
Yeah. Just before we go, just, when we're talking about different producers of skin contact wines, can we sort of like suggest to peeps what sort of producers they could go for?
I don't know, there are so many. Maybe we'll put some comments under the video when we post
I think that's
You're
a good
putting me
idea.
on the spot here.
No, because things peeps like Radicon, Gravner, Cos, maybe,
There's
and
some
then
international examples, and there's plenty of people in Australia playing with this stuff as well.
Pheasants, Tears.
Yes.
Because people are so interested in these styles of wines. Maybe we can sort of like suggest to people where they should go to when they're drinking these styles of wine.
Absolutely. I mean, apart from our wines, of course.
Our wines.
So I guess that brings us to the end of our Q&A. So a little reminder that 2 weeks' time, episode 5 of Wine Cult TV. They can't see you. Episode 5 of Wine Cult TV is going to be all about Nebbiolo. It's going to be the long format virtual tasting. So we will do 45 minutes of talking, and then we'll open the floor to some questions at the end. So please ask lots of questions. They help us to pick up on the things that we've missed.
Episode 5.
Yes.
Drink responsibly. Haro's in Rioja. Okay. Bye.
See ya.